Now, as I've said before, permitted development rights right now are the way to bypass all of that. When you apply for what's called a certificate of lawfulness, which is what allows you to benefit from the permitted development rights, there are certain assurances when you go through that process. First of all, you have an assurance of how long the application process is going to take. You also have an assurance about the decision. Now, that's the most important thing. You know that when you submit a certificate of lawfulness for something in the permitted development order, you should have a good knowledge and understanding that you are going to get permission. This video is kind of put together to kind of explain that whilst there may be a lot of government instability and economic instability, right now planning hasn't and probably will not change in the near to mid-term future. That's the good thing and bad thing about planning. It's an incredibly slow moving industry. Despite pressures from development, when it actually comes to the actual basic, planning is very, very slow moving and is very slow to catch up. So this video is a reminder to those that are worried about instability in the economy, instability in the government, wondering what's going to happen to their assets. It's a reminder of all the opportunities that are available to you under permitted development rights right now. There are more permitted development rights now than there have ever been, but the main benefit of all these additions to permitted development rights is to do with residential. You can add floor space, you can add roof extensions, side extensions, change of use, add new units. You can all do that under permitted development. Never has that been possible before. Normally, especially when you're trying to add new units, that comes with it a planning process. You need to apply for that. That's always been the case. This is the first time really that you can do new residential units under permitted development. Now, why is that so important? Well, as I've said before, the planning industry is a seriously slow moving process. And as anyone will know who's submitting an application to a local authority, it's not much quicker when you submit an application. So for those that don't know, once you submit an application, you get assigned a case officer, and the case officer reviews it and ultimately makes a decision. The case officer within the local authority. Now, back in the good old days when you used to submit applications, you used to talk to the officer, hi, how's it going? You didn't have to submit much information, you would talk it through and eventually you'd get permission. Now, the development industry has not slowed down. Obviously the population has gone up so much. One wants to extend their home or change use or build new buildings or whatever. Councils have for well over a decade now just suffered with lack of investment, and it means that when you submit an application, all these developments are coming in, but the local council has had no investment to the point where they haven't added more staff, so those officers are just getting loaded and loaded and loaded. So it means that the experience for someone who submits an application is very, very poor now. So you can submit an application, you might get a decision, but in that time you will never speak to a case officer. That is very, very common now. It used to be in only certain circumstances would that happen. Now it's got to the point where when you submit applications, you basically need to make sure that you know that you're going to get permission before you go to the authority, because authorities are so busy, they've got absolutely no business to want to negotiate with you to make something acceptable. They just need to get through the massive load of applications as quickly as they can, so they'll either grant it and they'll refuse it. Now, some might think that refusing it is what councils do, or they just refuse it. Just take note that actually when an officer has to refuse something, it's quite a lot of work, and they'd rather approve something in a local authority. When you're talking to your colleagues about what they're up to, what applications they've got, are you busy right now? Obviously always are, but they'll say, oh yeah, I've got a refusal to write, and that is always like, oh, you've got a refusal to write, that's quite a big deal because you need to write a whole report, a much longer report. Generally it's more detailed. So officers do want to grant things, just bear that in mind. So you just need to make it as simple as you can for them, so that when a decision comes, more often than not, you've got the likelihood that it's going to be approved. And also, if it gets to the point where they refuse it, but you've done all the right steps to make sure you get permission, your chances at appeal are much higher. So much time is wasted by people that submit applications, have no idea what they're doing. They don't look at policies, they don't look at history, they don't look at the site even. They submit something that they want rather than what policy allows, and it means that they get refused. They think they can win an appeal because the local authority don't know what they're doing. They get refused and they've just wasted so much money, so much time. So making those steps is really good. Now, as I've said before, permitted development rights right now are the way to bypass all of that. When you apply for what's called a certificate of lawfulness, which is what allows you to benefit from the permitted development rights, there are certain assurances when you go through that process. First of all, you have an assurance of how long the application process is going to take. You also have an assurance about the decision. Now, that's the most important thing. You know that when you submit a certificate of lawfulness for something in the permitted development order, you should have a good knowledge and understanding that you are going to get permission. It's very clear what is required within the permitted development order. So you basically just need, it's a tick box exercise. You tick it off, yes, and then just go through the criteria in the different parts of the permitted development order, and you'll find out that once you meet them, okay, it looks like I'm going to get permission here. There are things that you need to do. So what this video is going to do is go through the top 10 projects that you can get without planning permission. Now that is using the general permitted development order as I've referred to. You'll find that there are so many, and these are just the top 10. There are many more. So take note of them. If there are any in there that you want me to do more on, I'd be happy to do that. I can do a video on each one of them if you like. So now let's get into the top 10 projects. So the top 10 projects that you can do without planning permission, these are in no particular order, but we'll start with Class MA permitted development. Class MA permitted development allows you to change commercial buildings to residential with no limit on how many residential units you can get. It's just about how big that commercial building might be. Now, all of these projects that you can get without planning permission are all linked to a document called the General Permitted Development Order, and that lists a whole bunch of different types of development that you can do, and it is bigger than it's ever been. The amount of development that you can do now is just humongous compared to what you could do before. So Class MA permitted development is a huge thing. It gets a lot of popularity. I'm sure you've probably seen a few videos on it. Allows you to change commercial to residential, and that's anything within Class E, so that includes retail, standard office, gyms, and lots of other things. So have a look at what Class E includes, because there might be a building that you've seen that falls into Class E that may well benefit from changing use to residential through permitted development. Class G is very similar to Class MA. Class G allows you to change a commercial building to mixed use, keeping the ground floor to commercial and then changing the upper floors to up to two residential units. Now, I've done a video on this before, and the conditions on using Class G are there's a lot fewer conditions than there are for Class MA, and I think the barrier to entry for using Class G is a lot lower. So yeah, Class G is a great use of permitted development. So number 3 is rear extensions. Now the opportunities for rear extensions are much higher than they used to be. You can now extend your property 3, 4, 6 or 8 meters depending on whether you're a terraced or detached property, and also depending on whether you're in a conservation area or not. And this is massive. I mean, if you can extend your property up to 8 meters, that's a huge amount of development, even depending on how wide your property is. So simple residential alterations now, almost all of them are wrapped up into the general permitted development order, and it's a really great opportunity for people wanting to extend their homes and don't want to go through the planning process. The number 4 is outbuildings. You can build an outbuilding separated from your property, provided that it is incidental to the enjoyment of your dwelling house, which is basically a protection to stop people building in their back gardens and turning it into a flat or a house or a self-contained dwelling. But it's a really great opportunity to create things like home offices or home gyms or anything like that, even a swimming pool, and you can do it under permitted development. Next one is side extensions. You can extend your home no more than 50% of the original dwelling house. So if you add the rear extensions that I've just mentioned and the side extensions, you're talking about a huge amount of floor space that you can add under permitted development, all while you don't need to go through the whole planning process, which is a huge thumbs up. So number 6 is part 20 of the general permitted development order that was added quite recently, and this was a real kind of addition to respond to the issues around the supply of housing around the country. So you can now add 2 stories onto most different types of buildings, commercial or residential, for new flats, and it's a huge opportunity for people to add a huge amount of value and scale and floor space to their properties without having to go through the planning process. Now, there is a prior approval process which is different to the planning process. It's just more black and white. There are things you have to do, yes, but it's a lot more black and white than the whole planning process is, and it's a lot easier to navigate through than having to negotiate with officers and having that whole uncertainty about where your application might go. And similarly to part 20, Class AA, which is a class to extend and alter dwelling houses or houses, you can add up to 2 stories on your own property, provided unlike part 20, it's only for your own property, so you can add up to 2 stories but for floor space only. Now if you wanted to use the planning process after to subdivide your house and turn those 2 stories into flats, that's up to you, but using permitted development you can go up to 2 stories using Class AA. So I'll just rattle off these last 3. Changes of use: you can change a house into a small HMO and vice versa. You can add roof extensions, so things like dormer windows, and you can also, if you're in kind of a commercial developer and you know of a it's called a Class B8 use, a storage or distribution use, using permitted development you can now. When people make alterations to their house or changes of use to residential or any other alterations, they look to the 4-year rule to rectify the situation from a planning point of view. It's a well-used way of rectifying changes to your house that you haven't already got planning permission for. So this video is going to walk through the 4-year rule, explain what it is, and then go through best bits of evidence that you can submit to make sure that when you approach the council looking to use the 4-year rule, then you've got the best information possible. So I've been a planning officer in my career, and I've seen the 4-year rule used over and over again, and I've seen people make big mistakes with it, and I've also seen people that have just sailed through. So what is the 4-year rule? The 4-year rule is an area of planning where if you make changes to a house, or if you change the use of anything to residential, then you can benefit from what's called the 4-year rule, which is a way of you demonstrating to the council that what you've done to your property or the change of use that you've made was done without doubt more than 4 years ago. So the key to all of this, though, is that when you use the 4-year rule, the onus is on the applicant. So if you're approaching the council, then every bit of evidence is on you to provide. If you provide evidence and the council finds something to the contrary, then you could be refused. So you want to basically cover every single area that could possibly be used to demonstrate that what you're saying is true, and this video is going to walk you through that. So now let's walk through each bit of evidence that you can submit to make sure that your application using the 4-year rule just sails through with no problem. The first and most important piece of information or evidence is a statutory declaration, and this is essentially a statement from you asserting that something's true, and more often than not they're signed in the presence of a solicitor to formalise them. Now these can be declarations on behalf of you, but also from other people that are relevant to the application you're making. So as an applicant you can say, I believe that my rear extension was built more than 4 years ago, or my change of use happened to residential more than 4 years ago, and you sign it you believe it to be true. Then in all the other evidence that we're going to talk about later, you can have a statutory declaration from each of those people. So if you've appointed a contractor, you can ask them to write a quick statement to say, I was appointed on this date, I started work on this date, I completed work on this date, and then it needs to then match up with the evidence that you submit, again signed by a solicitor. And then if you're doing things like change of use to residential, let's say if you divided a house up into flats but never got permission for it, you will need statutory declarations, or you don't have to, but it was very helpful to have statutory declarations from each of the tenants, which is key to showing a kind of more than 4-year period. So if you did the works 5 years ago, they were completed, and then you started letting them out, it's very compelling evidence for you to have a statutory declaration from each of those tenants, which is then supported later on by the contracts that they signed, which would allow them to stay there. So statutory declarations are a really important first piece of information, and they're kind of the front runner, which is then backed up by all the other information that we're going to talk about next. Second bit of evidence is plans and evidence of completion of the work. So this is true of changes of use and extensions. So if you've made alterations to your house, let's say a rear extension, then obviously you need to submit plans to show that to be true. So plans that are accurate, so that if anyone does a site visit, they stand up to what you're showing. And then the key bit, because obviously we're talking about the 4-year rule here, so the key bit is to demonstrate any evidence of that work taking place, and any dated evidence that you have that supports that. So the key bit to this is things like before and after photos, and dated, so that's just one piece. But then also any contractor that you've appointed for the work, you'll need emails to show when they're appointed, when did they start, and then a kind of signed agreement between you and the contractor that's dated to say that more than 4 years ago we started work on this and we were appointed to do this work. Then you can do photos during the works to show how it was going on and how it eventually meets up with the what you're applying for then. And then a very important piece is a certificate of completion from basically when the contractor hands it back over to you. So you need something signed that confirms what has been done and when it was finished, and then that stacks up with the photos you have and adds on to your statutory declaration. So there you have one really good piece of evidence. The next bit of information, and this is really kind of most useful for when you're demonstrating that something has been changed to residential, not so much for extensions. So at the beginning of the video we talked about statutory declarations from each of your tenants to show that you've let the flats or the house for more than 4 years. So it's fine having that declaration, but then you need to back it up with something. And I've spoken about their contracts and their ASTs already, but the other really important information is their utility bills and council tax records. So council tax records are a great start because they are essentially showing, look, we're already registered in your council as having all these flats. So you just go to the council tax records website and it will show what band they're in. And if you can then print off that information or scan that information and put it in with your application, it's very compelling. Again, this all needs to stack up. If anything doesn't match up with what you're saying, then that's a kind of red flag to the officer. So yeah, council tax records, really, really key. So that shows that this house was divided into 4 flats more than 4 years ago. This is when the council tax records started, and this correlates with when the work was completed and when I let them out. The other one is utility bills, so electric, water and gas bills, showing that this tenant started paying bills with this provider on this date for this long, and then hopefully you should have a clear breakdown that this tenant paid these bills during this contract, and then the next contract, and so on and so forth up until the point that you're applying. So those are really, really compelling evidence. So if you've got a statutory declaration saying, I've let them out for 5 years, these are all the tenants saying that they lived there for more than 5 years, and then if you've got the utility bills to back it up, the tax records to back it up, then that's really, really compelling evidence. Another piece of information that I've touched on already is the tenancy records. So if all of your tenants have been there for so long, make sure you submit details of each tenancy to the council, which is then obviously backed up by everything I've said already. The other important thing you can add is their voting records. So once someone moves in and they want to vote in a local election, they will have records of that happening. So you can search on the council's website, find that, and again, if this all correlates, then you're in a really, really strong position. Last one is a mortgage valuation report. So if you divided the house up, or a house or anything up into flats, and you want to prove that you've done that, but if you borrowed money up against it, or if you needed a survey done or anything like that, then a valuation report can be done, and that essentially will explain what the property was when they went to value it. So if the flat was valued for X amount, in their report they will say upper floor flat, I've attended on this date and this is how much it's worth, blah blah blah. So it's just a very compelling piece of information that basically shows that someone went on site 5 years ago, they assessed the property, and they believed it to be what you're applying for. So again, very, very strong piece of information. And all of these things that we've talked about here are just, if you have all of these in line, then really there's no other way that the council can prove otherwise, because really you've got to prove without doubt that what you're saying is true. And if you cover off every bit of information that I've just listed here, then you're in a really strong position. But because essentially the officer is going to do the same thing. They're going to search for these things, and if they find anything that doesn't show what you're proving, what you're demonstrating, then it's a red flag, and you could be refused. Now the important thing to know is that if you're refused, there's no right of appeal. The only way that you can appeal is to the High Court, and that is the only way that that works is if you are trying to demonstrate that the council didn't make a decision in line with the legislation. So it's not like you go to the inspectorate and you argue your case like you do with a normal planning application. This is a matter of law if you're appealing that. So this is why it's really, really key and really important to show from the very first moment that you approach the council that everything you are showing is in place. Don't let the officer find out any otherwise, because if you get refused, do you need to go to the High Court if you want to appeal? You'll probably get served an enforcement notice, and the only way to sort that out is to rectify it from a planning point of view, which means that you may need to apply. Now the issue with that is that a lot of people use the 4-year rule sometimes to show that yes, I've got flats, but sometimes they're not up to standard if they were applying for planning permission. So if you get an enforcement notice saying that what you've done is unlawful, you need to rectify it, but you won't necessarily get planning permission for what you've got. You'll have to apply for something that may be better, which could cost you a lot of money to rectify. So if you're going to use the 4-year rule, make sure you have all of your information up front and just prove without doubt to the council that what you're saying is true, because it's really, really important. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to get in hot water, and no one wants that. So if you're thinking about getting planning permission for yourself, this video is going to kind of lay out exactly what you need to know in terms of what is it that you're likely to get permission for, what you need to consider when approaching the council, how to apply for planning permission or permitted development rights, as we'll get to, what to expect once your application is in, what's the actual process within the council. A lot of people get frustrated with the council, but I don't think people quite understand exactly what goes on, so hopefully this will kind of help you with that. How long it's likely to take to get permission, which varies unfortunately, and then what to do once you get permission, hopefully, or if you get refused. And if you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. When people have a house or a site they want to develop or extend, a lot of them go with what they want first, in terms of whether they want 3, 4, 5 meter extension, roof extension, side extensions, or if they want to build 5 houses on a site. Quite often people lead with that rather than doing this kind of basic assessment that will kind of give you a fair understanding of what is likely to get you permission from the outset. And it's a much more successful way of getting permission for things. So doing an assessment of your local area. So if we're talking about a house and you want to do an extension, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to build the biggest thing on the street. So if you have a look around your local area, just get a sense, how big are things? How deep are they going? What materials are they using? That's the kind of idea that you'll get as to what you can achieve. Because if there's 3 meter extensions everywhere, but you want to go for 6, there's probably a reason why. So that's your first step. Do an assessment. From there you can kind of say, okay, it's probably likely that I'm going to get 3 or 4 meter extension, or I'm going to get X many houses because of the prevailing development, and then you go from there. The next step to this, and this gives you a lot more accuracy on that last point, is checking the planning history. Very few people, I think, understands the value of checking the planning history. So if you've ever been consulted on an application, you'll know, or you'll see them on street posts, it will say the address, and it will say you're being consulted on this development, where it is. Or sometimes you'll get emailed if you get e-alerts, or you'll get a letter through the door. That is an application that you're being consulted on, and that is one of what will be hundreds that are in with the council at that time. I don't think people quite understand the volume that goes on. So checking your planning history is really important. So if you own your house, or if you're looking at purchasing a house or purchasing a bit of land, you can check the planning history. Every council has them. It's the statutory requirement. So go onto the local council's website, look for their planning search engine, type in the address that you're interested in, and look to see what applications have been submitted, and what is key to that, what decision has been made. Then you get an understanding of what's going on. So you can do that for your site, and then more broadly, particularly if you're going to extend your house on a street, have a look at the planning history for the whole street and see what people are trying to do, and also what's getting refused and approved and that kind of thing. And if you want to take that a slight step further, if you find an application that's been refused or granted, you can check why the officer made that decision in most cases. So more often than not, there will be an officer's report, or sometimes it's called a delegated report, and you can look on that document and it will explain how the officer came to that decision against the planning policies. So once you've done a local planning history search and you've done an assessment of the surrounding area, the next thing to do is to kind of form an idea as to what your proposal might look like. And what's key to this is, what materials are you going to use? Where are the windows? Where are they going to face? How big? So if you're doing new flats, how big are they going to be? Because they need to meet certain standards. How tall is it? Do you think there's going to be any need for obscure glazing? I.e., are you going to overlook on neighbours that might cause an amenity issue? Things like that. The key to this is, so once you choose that, understand that once you get planning permission, it's an enforceable document. It's not just a rough guide of, oh, there's a window there's a roof extension. The planning permission sets out drawings that you will submit with the application, and you are it's an enforceable document, i.e. if you build anything different, you're not in accordance with the plans, and that means that you could be open to enforcement action. So it's important to understand that now, because enforcement is really, really messy, and it could get to the point where you need to tear everything down, and no matter how much it's going to cost you, that's not an issue for the council. You haven't built what's in accordance with the plan, so that's really important to know. There's a lot of famous cases that I'm sure you can find on the internet. So choose what you want, make sure you like what you want, and then build to those plans. So the next step is then getting your drawings together. Now, this is where a lot of people get, I think, scared by it, because it's very expensive to get architectural drawings done. So if you're doing a house extension, the level of detail that you need, you don't need an architect for, quite frankly, you don't. So you can get someone who's good at CAD, or someone who can do a survey of your house and is able to form plans for you. And then from there, you can do your extensions. If you have the abilities, you can obviously do them yourself, and that's fine. Through your planning history search, just find out what drawings have been submitted for the type of development that you need to do. Take that, and then you can get an understanding of what drawings that you want to do yourself. But it doesn't need to be too detailed. Whilst I've said before that you need to know the appearance in terms of the materials and the windows and things like that, it doesn't need to be incredibly detailed. It just needs to be clear and understandable, so that someone looking at it can understand what you're going to build. So you don't need an architect for this. There's a common misconception. So this is where you can make a lot of savings. So once you've done your assessment, you've got your drawings, effectively you're ready to go to get planning permission. Now, what a lot of people do here is they can either go for applying for pre-application advice or go straight to applying for planning permission. Now, my personal view is, unless you are doing something really, really big, which generally involves consultants, or you're doing something really controversial, that's controversial, or you're doing a type of development that the council hasn't really dealt with in your searches before, I would personally avoid pre-application advice, because pre-application advice can take just as long as the planning process, i.e. there is no effective end date to it. And also, if you've ever seen pre-application advice, I was an officer myself, and I've written them before, and I've seen other people's bits of advice, and the level of detail that you get will not be what you're hoping for. I think a lot of people, when they're pre-application advice, they effectively are hoping that they are going to get a simple yes or no on their development. Hopefully they want a yes, but unfortunately it doesn't quite go to that level. And unless your development is absolutely bang on in terms of meeting all the council's policies, then you are going to find that the officer's report, when it comes to pre-application advice, is not particularly helpful. So effectively what they're saying is, I'm giving you all this advice, but it's not a material consideration when you submit your application. So that's a really problematic thing for people, and it's really, really unhelpful. So my personal view, I would avoid pre-application advice. Leave it to only if you're doing a really big development, or if you're doing a really particular type of development that has not been dealt with the council. But in most cases, your development has been done somewhere in the council. You can find a before that you can relate to and get feedback off, and I would do that personally. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting a long time through pre-application. So the next step is applying for permission. Now, you've got a few options here. You can, if you're just a one household, so that's a normal terraced house, say detached, semi-detached, whatever, you can apply for what's called householder permission. And that basically, there's no difference really in terms of how it's assessed. It's just a different price when you pay for your application. Then there's full planning permission. So if you're doing anything to flats, or if you want to build a new unit, or if you want to change use, or if you want to basically do anything that isn't involving a house, then you apply for full planning permission. Now, the other option is, if you find that you can go down the permitted development route, then you can apply for a certificate of lawfulness. So those are the kind of three main options you have. So once your application's submitted, I'll just kind of run through what then happens. So if you've applied for full planning permission, what effectively happens is some councils have what's called a validations team, and that's effectively a halfway house between you and the planning officer. So what they're doing is they're checking that your application meets their requirements, i.e., do you have the right drawings? Are the application forms filled out correctly? Have you paid the fee? That kind of thing. So you can get a jump on all this if you just do a quick review before you submit to find out what you need. Every council has a list of what drawings they require for certain types of development, but if you are doing something like a house, they are more often than not exactly the same. So you need a location plan, you need a site plan, you need floor plans, sections, elevations, and sometimes you'll need a contextual elevation to show how your development sits in, let's say, a terrace if you're doing a roof extension or something like that. And once you get validated, this is when the kind of formal process starts. So this is when the planning officer sends out consultations. So they'll do a quick review of the application themselves, just check everything's fine once the validations team has handed it over to them. And this is when they consult. So there's a 21-day public consultation. So they'll send out 21 days. Those are the notices that I was talking about earlier. So you'll get a public notice sent out, and the members of the public will get an opportunity to object or comment or support your development. And there's also, depending on what the type of development you're doing, this is when also that the planning officer consults internally. So if there's transport issues, they'll consult the transport department, or if you're in a conservation area or you're doing works to a listed building, they're going to consult a conservation officer. And got to understand where there's a lots of moving parts within the council. So whilst the planning officer is the guy that makes the decision, he is or she is waiting for answers from all these different people. So that's where a lot of lag time can happen, just for your information. So when I was a planning officer, this is what had the biggest impact on the actual time that I was able to get the permission out or the decision out, because I was waiting on key people to get back to me in order to make the decision. And during the determination period, the officer is going to want to make a site visit, sometimes accompanied or sometimes unaccompanied. More often than not, if you're doing small stuff, they'll try and do it unaccompanied, but if you're doing a rear extension and they need to see in the back garden, they'll need to get access. So this is when the planning officer will come and have a look, but just understand that you can only talk to them about the planning matters. So they don't care about how much it's cost you, they don't care about how much value is going to be added. What they care about is the planning matter. Is it appropriate for the area? Is it too big? Is it too small? Are the materials right? Are the windows all right? Is there any impacts on neighbours? And if you're building houses, things like they want to get a sense spatially of the area. How close are you to neighbours? Again, does it fit in with the local area? So you can only speak to the planning matters and answer the questions that they're asking in relation to that. And in terms of the timescales it takes, this is a huge issue with the planning industry. Never has there been a time where councils have been quiet. If you call up a council now, they'll say, oh, we're incredibly busy right now, so decisions are taking a lot longer than usual. I mean, I've been in the industry over 10 years, and that's been the case every time you speak to an authority. They'll always say we're a little bit busier than usual, so decisions are taking longer. So it's just going to take a long time. Just bear that in mind. It's a process. So there is an 8-week statutory deadline, but what councils are doing, and what I did, is to negotiate extensions of time. So what that does is it allows them some breathing room. It allows them, key is the statutory breathing room. That's the important bit, because this is a kind of advanced strategy. But if you've gone past the 8 weeks, you have a right of appeal because they haven't made a decision. So that's why the council is trying to negotiate an extension so they can have time to make a decision. Also, while they're doing it, is because the government is keeping an eye on all councils to make sure that their decisions are being made on time. The government has made threats to step in if councils aren't making enough decisions on time. So all these threats are meaning that when it comes down to the planning officer level, they're trying to negotiate extensions of time as much as possible. You may have gone through that already, but that's why that's happening. And lastly, once you get the decision, hopefully you've got planning permission. If you've got planning permission, check that the drawing numbers on the document are correct, like you've submitted, because as I said before, it's an enforceable document, so it needs to be right. Check the conditions. What catches a few people out is what's called pre-commencement conditions. And if there's a condition on your decision that says cannot start works until, or development cannot be begun until. Keep an eye out for those words, because that's really important, because like the condition says, you cannot start work until you discharge those conditions. So keep an eye out for those. And if you've been refused, you have a time period in which to appeal, and then you basically go to what's called the planning inspectorate and you submit your appeal, and you submit what's called grounds of appeal, which is explaining why planning permission should be issued to convince the inspectorate to make a decision otherwise. So if you're trying to get planning permission by yourself, that's how you do it. And if you're considering doing planning permission by yourself, it's very simple. You can bring the costs right down if you know what you're doing, and hopefully this video is kind of give you the steps to do that. Authorities are so busy, they've got absolutely no business to want to negotiate with you to make something acceptable. They just need to get through the massive load of applications as quickly as they can, so they'll either grant it and they'll refuse it. Now, some might think that refusing it is what councils do, or they just refuse it. Just take note that actually, when an officer has to refuse something, it's quite a lot of work, and they'd rather approve something in a local authority when you're talking to your colleagues about what they're up to, what applications they've got. Are you busy right now? Obviously, you always are. But they'll say, oh yeah, I've got a refusal to write. And that is always like, oh, you've got a refusal to write. That's quite a big deal, because you need to write a much longer report. Generally, it's more detailed. So officers do want to grant things. Just bear that in mind. So you just need to make it as simple as you can for them, so that when a decision comes, you've got the likelihood that it's going to be approved. If you want to know what the rules of permitted development rights are, then this video is the first of a kind of series of how to use permitted development rights to add the most value to your property. And this video is all about houses. So permitted development rights have changed a lot in the last couple of years, whereby now you can add an amazing amount of value and floor space through permitted development rights alone. And the reason why that's so exciting for developers and property owners is anyone who's ever come across the planning system knows how convoluted, how inconsistent, how long it takes to get permission. So permitted development rights are a whole way of kind of sidestepping that whole process. It gives you certainty and an assurance about what you can do with your property, so that you can know before you even apply that you're going to get permission, and you can also do the kind of calculations as to how much value that's going to add, because officers won't, there's not that issue of officers refusing it or negotiating a reduction in the size of anything you want to do, because there's certainty. So this video is going to be walking through the best strategies to do that. I'm going to be giving you at least four, and I'll be saving the best in my opinion till the end. So stick around for that. So let's start off with the first one. So before we get into each strategy, I'll just kind of set the scene of what permitted development rights are and the things to look out for in the context of this video. So all of these types of development come from a document called the General Permitted Development Order. It's a document that lists out all the different types of development you can do without planning permission, and within there there's certain conditions. So that's where this comes from. The other thing is to look out for is Article 4 directions. It's a word that's thrown about and not many people really quite understand what it is. Article 4 directions restrict certain types of permitted development rights, not all. So as part of your research using this video, you'll need to find out what the Article 4 direction specifically restricts. It doesn't necessarily block all of them, so you may well be able to benefit from all the things I mentioned in this video, but there may be an Article 4 direction in place on your site, but it might not affect you. So just know that it's quite an important thing. Conservation areas, generally speaking, they restrict the amount of permitted development that you can do, so know that. Listed buildings do not benefit from permitted development. Neither do flats. It's a kind of a weird hole in the system. So if a house has been subdivided into flats, you can't benefit from permitted development rights. You can still apply for these things though, and quite likely get permission. But if you want to use the kind of the PD process, then flats don't really get the chance to do that. And the last thing to note is that even though these things are quote unquote permitted, you must always get a decision from the council to prove it so, because if you want to sell the house, when solicitors do their checks, they'll want to know that what you've done has got permission, and also you'll want to get to know if anyone complains. So if a resident complains, you'll have a certificate to show them. If you build something without permission, even though it is quote unquote permitted, you'll get enforcement officers involved, and it creates a whole issue that you don't want to deal with in the planning system. So always get your decisions from council. So that's just a kind of introduction and things you consider before we get into the strategies. So as I said before, this video is about permitted development for houses in particular, and all of the permitted development rights come from a document called the General Permitted Development Order. And the reason I'm saying that is because everything that's related to houses, or in the curtilage of a dwelling house as it says, is within part 1 of the General Permitted Development Order. So part 1 lists all of them, and within each part there's classes which tell you what types of development you can do. So class A, starting off with the first one, is about enlargement of your dwelling house. These are the things that you can do, like rear extensions, side extensions and roof extensions. There are kind of caveats within either of them, and the kind of headlines are that you can do rear extensions of 3, 4, 6 or 8 meters, and that depends on whether you're a detached, semi-detached or terrace property, and also whether you're in a conservation area. The other one is side extensions, so you can extend sideways from your property, but to ensure that you're not more than 50% of the original dwelling house. The other class of note within part 1 is class AA, and this allows you to go up to 2 stories of additional height on your property if you're already above 2 stories, and if you're a single story you can go up to one story. For this class you do need something called prior approval, which is a kind of pared back planning process, so you still need to get an assessment needs to be done by the council to do this, but essentially the principle is established. You can't do this in conservation areas. The materials must be similar to the main house, and this is kind of true of all PD. When you're doing with extensions, they all have to be similar in design to the main house. So the design has to be the same. No windows on a side elevation. The roof pitch, so if you've got a pitched roof, you have to go up in the same pitch. You can't change the profile, and it has to be used for residential purposes. So that's just preventing you from changing the use of the upper stories for other uses. So those are the first 2 classes within part 1 for enlarging your house, and if you add all those things up together, particularly the rear, side and roof extensions, that's a lot of floor space. So class E is quite an exciting part of the General Permitted Development Order. This deals with outbuildings. So and I think it's very relevant, with COVID and how everyone now works from home. Everyone wants their work from home space. So outbuildings are a really nice way of kind of separating your work and home life. So you can build a outbuilding that is no bigger than 50% of the total curtilage, and it must not exceed 3,500 cubic meters, so whichever is less. Now the key to this is though that it has to be incidental to the enjoyment of the dwelling house, which is basically a funny way of saying that it has to stay within the single use of your house. So you can use it as a gym, you can use it as a swimming pool, you can use it as a home office, you can use it as anything you want. The point is here that you cannot kind of establish the principle here of building an outbuilding and then change the use, or do a title split and then sell it off as its own self-contained unit. That's a big kind of planning issue in itself, and I've been in appeals where that's the case. So just bear that in mind. So you can build an outbuilding, but it has to be incidental to the enjoyment of the dwelling house, but this adds a huge amount of value to your property. So I said if you stuck around to the end, I'll be giving you a bonus strategy. So this video is about how the rules of permitted development rights for houses, not only extensions to houses, but also the possibility of getting new houses. And that's where the kind of most exciting part of PD has changed in the last couple of years. So part 20, which is the last part that was added in the General Permitted Development Order, is about the construction of new dwelling houses. And in there they've got class ZA, A, AA, AB, AC, AD. And basically these are just listing the various types of buildings that you can add up to 2 stories on these buildings for new dwelling houses. So unlike before where it was just 2 stories for an extension for your own house, these are for the principal aim of adding flats to new blocks of flats in residential use. You can add 2 stories to commercial buildings, and then residential buildings that are either in terraced, detached, or if they're blocks of flats. So it's a really in the grand scheme of things, the country is really struggling for housing delivery. So this is the a huge step from the state government to give everyone assurance that we can add new houses on these sites. But the point is that the principle of adding 2 stories on a lot of the country has been established. So it's a really good opportunity for anyone that owns any types of these buildings, and it also lets you think creatively about a type of building that wouldn't necessarily be suitable for new flats. You now have the PD right to benefit from it. So Part 20 is a really interesting part of PD, and one that can really be, if used well, can add immense value by adding, if you can add 2 units to on these sites, we're talking about an incredible uplift in value. So Part 20 is really good to be aware of. So that's it. So those are the best strategies to use for houses. Those are the rules for permitted development rights for houses. If there's anything here that you want me to expand more on, for instance, like if you want me to talk more about Part 20, I'm happy to do that. And there's also other parts of the General Permitted Development Order that I've done videos on as well, like Class MA Permitted Development, which is commercial to Resi. That's quite an exciting part. So if there's any other strategies you want me to touch more on, please leave a comment below and I'll be happy to do another video on it as well. And until then, I'll see you on the next video.